I would like to introduce Mark. Mark happens to be a minister and has been studying, obviously, religion of his own for a really long time as being a minister, but he also branched into spirituality and looking into other religious forms over the course of his career. And so, with that being said, Mark, can you go ahead and elaborate more about your background and kind of the backstory about your own time of spiritual disillusionment and kind of moving away from your own faith that you grew up in?
Yeah, thank you, Kathryn. And I also want to say thanks to all those who are watching and participating in this. I have my own background, and the the faith tradition that I come from and the journey that I've had, I believe is going to be applicable to a variety of backgrounds. As you said, I am a minister. I grew up as a Christian in a Christian household. Went to a private Christian school, and I don't know that it took me a while to embrace the Christian faith in my own life. And then went off to college, and probably the only time I had serious doubts and questions was in that period of time in college. And I think that's really a common thing, that you grow up with something, you grow up with beliefs sort of handed to you by your parents or other people in your upbringing, your conditioning, so to speak. And then at a certain point, you have to wrestle through and settle the question of if it's your own or not, right? What makes sense to you as you sort of come into your own as an adult. And so going through that, it wasn't a huge, rocky, full of doubts, that kind of thing, but some questioning time. And then eventually, or as part of that, I also then felt the desire to become a pastor myself, to be a leader in churches. And so I started a couple of churches, started a church in Austin, Texas, started a church in Minneapolis, senior pastor in these settings. And for me, it's sort of like the wheels fell off then. This was the early 2000s, and a variety of things going on in terms of like a midlife crisis, in terms of the church was very successful and growing, and at the same time it was really challenging because we had a variety of very strong, capable leaders who didn't see eye to eye about a lot of stuff. And so there was a lot of sort of like, things that I was working through in terms of conflict and keeping everyone on the same page, and then getting burnt out. Also, was struggling with addiction in my own life, and coming to terms with that, and sort of doing what I needed to do to be well. Anyway, in the course of that, I decided to take a leave of absence and from the ministry role, and that was a little bit rocky because. And this was then kind of the beginnings of some of the disillusionment for me, was that it sort of became apparent that, for me to have questions and struggles and whatever seemed to be really unsettling to other people. And a lot of things started to happen, and rumors were beginning to circulate about what was really going on, that sort of thing. And that was sort of disillusioning to me about this community. But the real key is I actually remember the specific day and time. I was in a bookstore, in a Borders bookstore. It used to be a chain bookstore, looking at a particular book and thinking to myself, this looks interesting. I shouldn't read this, because it had an atheist perspective, was kind of talking about stuff that was critical of the church. And I thought, well, wait a minute, I'm going to read this. I shouldn't just like block myself from reading stuff. Well, anyway, so I took that book home, started to read it, and this began a journey where I was basically giving myself permission to to rethink all the things I'd grown up in. And again, it seems strange that this would happen. I was, probably early 40s at this point, and I had been a pastor leading other people in it, and and at the same time having my own questions and wrestlings about what I was seeing in other people, what I was experiencing in myself. So this began, just kind of went down a rabbit hole, right? Um, and I think the first thing that happened was I read a lot of books then that were critical of the Christian faith, and they made a lot of sense to me. Their criticisms spoke to what some of my concerns and frustrations were, and the questions that I was having. And by the way, at this point, I left my role as a pastor, and then I actually got involved as a director of training for a recovery organization. But so now, not committed to communicating to other people, and just sort of free to think about this stuff for myself. There's this interesting quote. I think it's Mark Twain. He said, "It's hard to get someone to question something when he is paid to not question it." And this is a challenge for spiritual leaders who are in a particular setting. And I actually believe this creates a form of arrested development, because we're threatened by questions and uncertainty about sort of the dogma or the doctrines, the beliefs of our group. And so therefore we don't want to go there, quote unquote. I don't want to go there. Like for me, I don't think I should read this book because it might, cause me to be disillusioned or question whatever. So anyway, I was in that mode of not going there. Anyway, I'm now in this situation in my life where a lot of things are up in the air. So I start going there. I start with these questions. And so I think there's a pretty lengthy period of time in there where if you would have asked me where I was, what I thought, what I believed, I would have said I'm an atheist. I don't think any of this is real. I think this stuff that I was doing, anyway, I won't go into it, but I was kind of convinced that everything was just projection and it was unreal. And that was, really disheartening. And then, but what was interesting to me, or what kind of happened for me, is that as time went on, I found myself continuing to have thoughts and questions, and kind of questioning my atheism, questioning, well, how does this work, and what, anyway. So I continued this path. And I'm happy to talk about this as much as people would like to, but I don't want to bore people with more details. But I'll just say that this then led me on a journey of, so I was thinking to myself, well, maybe if the Christian faith that I grew up in does not answer the questions, does not, sort of make sense to me, are there other traditions, other insights, other wisdom that's out there in the world that that might make more sense to me? That anyway, so I bought so many books and went to different spiritual centers, met with different people, and I want to be careful here when I say that I explored or embraced in certain ways certain religious traditions. I know that I was scratching the surface with them. I don't, in any way claim to have like fully embraced and gone deep, but I think there was a period of time for me of really exploring Buddhism, and then Taoism. I think in some ways those two traditions, I feel like I still have a lot of respect, and I still read stuff in them and get a lot of benefit from reading that. And and I also will say, I know I've gotten to know people from other countries, and what's interesting to me, this is probably good to put this out there in the Lifebook community, is what I have a perception of, and what many of us Westerners have a perception of what Buddhism is or what Taoism is, can be very, very different than what, someone in Tibet or India or China, what they think Buddhism is. I was in Thailand for a few weeks a couple of years ago, and it was just very fascinating to me, spending some time in the Buddhist temples there and talking to people and realizing that Buddhism, to me as a Westerner, and the books that I had read, was very different than the Buddhism that they experienced. So anyway, I want to be clear about that. So Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, those were kind of the main ones. And then kind of what happened for me is I came across teaching, and I can't remember now if this was the Dalai Lama or if it was Thich Nhat Hanh. One of them, in one of their talks I was listening to, challenged people to say, look, we don't need you. If you're a Christian, we don't need you to become a Buddhist. If you're a Buddhist, you don't need to become a Christian. Whatever your tradition is, go deep in that tradition, and you will find a connection to God, connection to the divine, connection to whatever the source is that you're needing. You will find that. And so anyway, again, as I had been doing a fair bit of looking around and investigating things, that sort of resonated with me, and I came across some ways of thinking about my faith and my own tradition that was bigger than the assumption that I had about what Christianity was, that sort of allowed me to embrace my Christian faith in a different way, and so that's really where I landed. And let me just I'll add another piece here, Kathryn, because I think this is important. This might come up. I'll say that I have a great respect for some of the, let's say, the new atheist authors. Still listen quite a lot to Sam Harris's podcast, but I do think there's like a false choice that is being presented to people, and whether they intend to do it or not. But so someone comes from a Christian perspective, let's say, or some other tradition, Islamic, and you can go to these authors or other people, and you can find things that cause you to question your whatever faith you grew up in. And that happened to me. And this, what happens for so many of us is that we say, okay, so this author or these these teachings, these insights really raise questions about the faith that I grew up in. So Christianity must just be untrue. This must just be a made up thing or unhelpful. And so it's sort of like it's the all or nothing thing. And so if there are holes in the perspective of Christianity that you grew up in, that causes you to just sort of throw it all out. But what I came to realize is that Christianity, the sort of the tent of the Christian faith, is so broad, that what helped me was to see there's a lot of helpful things. There's a lot of things that still ring true in my life that I want to embrace and that I do embrace. And so there's a way of being a Christian, a follower of the teachings of Jesus Christ, that may not include all of those other things, but I don't have to like set up this false either or black and white kind of thing. And again, I do see that with a lot of the people that I talk to, that sort of feel like some things have come up in their life that don't ring true, or that cause them to think that the Christian faith they grew up in doesn't ring true. And so then the next step is to jettison all of it, as if this little branch of Christianity that you grew up in represents the whole thing. And I suspect the same thing would be true of Islam. Buddhism is less oriented towards dogma, but other religions as well. And so that's what it sort of enabled me to come back and begin then to embrace it again, embracing it in a different way. I'll stop there. Got more that I will say, but see what if that makes sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And my personal feeling in general is that there are times where you want to throw the baby out with the bathwater because you're so frustrated, and then there are other times you realize that that baby is not the frustration, it's the cold bathwater. So I do believe, I mean, like I think I can see that being a part of a religious and spiritual path that needs to be viewed as we progress in this category of our lives, because that is a challenge. I know I struggled myself for a long time, and finally got to my equilibrium as to where I was comfortable with what I believed and what I was going to just toss out because it didn't fit in my understanding of life, nor did it feel comfortable. It didn't feel right. And even though it didn't feel comfortable, and I addressed it as to, is it uncomfortable because it's stretching me in a direction I'm not ready to go, or is it uncomfortable because it goes against what I actually view when I talk to people? And so I do believe that was a very excellent point that you brought up. So thank you for
Well,
adding that
thank
in.
you. And when we talked, Kathryn, I did mention that I have a couple of things that I've put in a PowerPoint thing. I don't want to make a presentation here, but I thought maybe some of these things it might be helpful to have visually. And so I'm going to show you, take the screen over and show you this. And we'll do this where people who are on this, who signed up for this, we'll get you this information so you can have it as your own. But let me just share the screen here for a sec. And all right, so so now are you seeing the full screen? You're able to see this, Kathryn?
Yeah. Yep,
Okay.
sure can.
So this I'll tell you, so part of the recovery experience for me, some of you might be familiar with 12-step recovery. There's steps 2 and 3 that have to do with spiritual things. So step 2 is that we came to believe that some higher power, a power greater than ourselves, could restore us to sanity, could bring restoration in our lives. And then the third step is that we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to this higher power, whatever that is, right? Well, as part of that process, I had to sort through, what do I think about? What do I believe about God or about the higher power? And I did a variation of this. Again, this was a number of years ago. And since then, I've actually come back to this exercise a couple of times. And I've worked with probably hundreds of people to do this exercise themselves. And so it's 3 questions. If you're having sort of uncertainty about, where the faith you grew up in, and well, this disconnect that exists for so many people between what they're supposed to believe, what they were taught to believe, what their religion embraces, and again, they're not sure where they stand on it. So sit down with a piece of paper, and you don't need to write a novel about this. I actually encourage people to just make bullet points. I think all the times I've done this, it's never been more than 2 pages. So the first thing is, what are some of the things that I was taught that I still believe? And when I say still believe, that ring true with the world as I perceive it. Help me remember, Kathryn, to tell a story about the map and the ground. I'll come back to that later. But so what are the things that I was taught that I still believe? And then the second one, what are the things that I used to believe, that I was taught to believe, that just don't make sense, that don't match with the world as I see it? And then what are some of the things that I was taught that I'm not sure about anymore? And I will tell you, when I work with people who are dealing with addiction of various kinds, alcohol, drugs, food, sex, many of them, because of my background, many of them have a religious background themselves, Jewish or Christian, some from other religions, but mostly the people I work with in the recovery part of my life would have some sort of connection to Christianity. And almost everyone have something wacky going on here. That there's a sense about what they're supposed to believe, what they were taught to believe, whatever, that isn't quite working, isn't ringing true. And so these questions are an essential ingredient for recovery from addiction. Because if you don't have this, what you have is inauthenticity. So I'm going to stop this share a sec. And I'll remember, I'm going to remember to tell you the story of the map in the ground. It's a book, and I can't remember the name of the author right now, but the book title is called Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart. I love the title, Too Soon Old, Too Late Smart. And he talks about this experience he had where he was in the military, and he took over a group of soldiers. I'm making clear that I'm not military myself. I can't remember the terminology, but so he leads this exercise, and they're given a map, and they're dropped into these woods in the middle of the night. And so they're dropped in, and he's got this map, and he's looking at the map, and he can't figure it out. And then there's this other guy, this master sergeant, that comes along and says, "Is there a problem, sir?" And he said, "Well, this map says it looks like there should be a hill right there, but there's not." And anyway, the sergeant says, "I've come to figure out that if the map don't agree with the ground, the map is wrong." And I came across that quote again when I was in the midst of this stuff, and that's again what so many of us have, that we go through life and we've got this map that the religion of our upbringing gave us, and it is not matching the ground. Like for me, especially around addiction and the ways that you get over addiction, it was not working. And so then, trust the ground, trust what you see. And then that's again what gets back to those questions that I just showed, to get to some place of authenticity then.
Yeah, I can totally, yep, I can relate to that quote totally, because that matches exactly my dream too. Like I had to trust what was on the ground, and the map that I had actually been torn into shreds by a religion professor. And so I ended up having to create my own map again, because there was nothing left of the confetti by the time the professor was done with the class. So we were all supposed to put our confetti back together after we've done it. It was a very interesting experience. So going along with that, what was the hardest part for you and the others that you worked with to find your way into spirituality and balance it with the religion?
I think probably the biggest challenge for me, and again, I think I see it with others as well, is the sense that when what you grew up in, when you realize there's aspects of it that aren't working, and maybe even, so it's not even simply an intellectual exercise. It's not even simply that intellectually I see this doesn't work, but there can also be hurt and disillusionment because people were jerks. You felt judged by other people, or you saw them do things. Boy, every time you open the newspaper these days, there's another story of some religious leader doing some horrible thing, and so we can get disillusioned in a lot of ways. And so then the question then, or the issue then, is what am I going to keep, if I'm going to keep anything? So the temptation to, as you said, throw the baby out with the bathwater, just jettison the whole thing. So within Christianity, especially in America today, there's such diversity. In fact, I've heard authors say there's not even a Christianity, singular. There are Christianities, plural, in this country. And so one of the branches is the evangelical Christianity. And that is, there's a lot of stuff being written about the American evangelical Christianity, how dysfunctional it's become, how overly politicized it's become, et cetera, et cetera. And there are people that grew up in the evangelical church that are just leaving in droves. I spoke at a conference a couple years ago on this very theme. And it was basically a bunch of people that they go to this conference, and they're trying to figure out how to sort of make sense of their Christian faith now in the light of what they've experienced. But then there's another aspect of the conference, which is really encouraging people to get involved in social justice issues. But I was focusing on the spiritual disillusionment aspect of it. And so the phrase that has become kind of a big word these days, a thing today, is deconstruction. And that's what your professor was doing, is challenging people who grew up with a certain religion to deconstruct it. What is it that doesn't make sense? What is it that doesn't work? And that's valuable to do. This is now getting to your question. What is it that's challenging for people to do? And what I would say is the important next step is reconstruction. So it's easy to say this isn't working, but what is working? And how can you forge something that's meaningful? Again, without jettisoning what doesn't work, but not throwing it all out together. And so I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to share the screen again. Okay, I'm going to take over the screen again and show you a couple more things. So I think this would have to do with relating. Let's see, how do I get out of this? Okay. So this question of, if you get to the point where you say, when I grew up and I don't believe this anymore, this doesn't make sense, the reality is we are still left with some very important questions. And these are the spiritual questions that all of us have to come to terms with at some level. And whatever religion that a person grew up in, um, the great religions of throughout history, they have found ways to answer these questions. And we may not like those answers, but again, if we reject those religions, we still have to deal with these questions, right? So is there a force out there? Is there a being out there, or a ground of being that's in everything in me? Is there some sort of higher power? The second question, what happens after we die? Is this all there is? The third question, what's my purpose in life? Is there some point to all this? And number four, what do I believe about morality? What's the most important thing in life? And then number five, the practical thing then, okay, so how do I bridge these things into my life every day? So it's one thing to have, certain ideas, but how do I help make these things a reality? And so my point here is that these are questions that all of us have to deal with. And I know, and one of the things I appreciate about the Lifebook program, when John talks about this, these are the things that come up, and all of us in the Lifebook, as part of the Lifebook process, these are the kinds of things, not maybe specifically each of these questions, but the spiritual category, it helps us reflect on these things. And going back to this question you asked about, what's hard is the temptation that people have once they've sort of reached the point of disillusionment with the faith that they grew up in, to just not deal with these other questions. And one of the things that we know from mental health and well-being is, if these questions aren't answered, if we don't have some way of coming to terms with these, we are not going to be well mentally. And so that is going to lead to anxiety, it's going to lead to depression, it's going to lead to addiction. I can get to that with other things in just a little bit, but so we've got to come to terms with them. And so now we're stuck. What does reconstruction look like? How do we do that? And when you and I were talking about this seminar or this workshop, and I suggested that I wanted to share some quotes and put them on the screen, this next thing I'm going to share was the first quote that came to my mind. And this is Barbara Brown Taylor. And I really wanted people to see this, because we do struggle with that question of the religion and spirituality. And so she has an interesting take on the value of religions. So she says this: religions are treasure chests of stories, songs, rituals, and ways of life that have been handed down for millennia, not covered in dust, but evolving all the way, so that each new generation has something to choose from when it's time to ask the big questions in life. Where do we come from? Why do bad things happen to good people? Who is my neighbor? Where do we go from here? And now this is her point. She says, no one should have to start from scratch with questions like these. Overhearing the answers of the world's great religions can help anyone improve his or her own answers. Without a religion, those questions often do not get asked. So this is the idea that, in fact, I'm going to stop sharing a sec. So this distinction is what I find helpful about religion and spirituality. And I mean, you can just Google religion versus spirituality and you'll find a million articles. Every book on spirituality will have, a chapter on the distinction between spirituality and religion. So this is obviously nothing new, but I'll just say, for our purposes here, this could be helpful, is to think about spirituality as those questions that we were just talking about. It's the ultimate, I think Paul Tillich, one of the theologians, said that it's about what is of ultimate concern. What is of ultimate concern in life, in the world. So that's what spirituality is, some sort of higher power, or a power that's in us. Religion is the window that we look out of to access that spirituality. It's the mechanism that allows us to connect with that reality. Um, and so, depending on which window you look out of, different windows might reveal that ultimate reality of spirituality in a different way. And so the religions, the great religions of the world, they've been around for a long time because they have developed helpful answers to those questions, and they've developed helpful technologies, I'm using air quotes, technologies, to help us connect to the divine. And so I do think that in some ways this distinction that we've created, or that we make between religion and spirituality, sometimes can be unhelpful, because it's like it's almost like you have to look out of some window to see, or some way to connect to a higher power or the divine, dealing with those ultimate questions. And so yeah, I'm looking through this window and I don't like it. I'm going to say, I'm going to forget religion. I'm going to do my own thing. I just want spirituality. But what that means is I'm just going to look out of a different window to spirituality. And I just, in the work that I do with people, hope to help them find a valuable, helpful window to go to look out of. That was a long answer to your question, but anyway, I hope some of that was helpful.
It was a long answer, but I think you covered some of the other portions of other questions. So I'm going to skip down to what happens when you do not feel connected to religion or spiritual matters? What happens when you have disconnected completely? And how do you, if so not only what happens if you disconnect completely and you choose to stay disconnected, but also then how do you reconnect as part two of that question?
That's really important. So I have atheist friends. I have atheist family members. And I have a lot of sympathy based on my own experience towards that view. And I recognize there's a lot of people growing, fast growing groups of people who are disillusioned with what they've seen in religion, whatever religion they have, and are let's just say dispensing it all. And so what I would say is that well, I say a couple of things. The first thing that is really important for all of us, wherever we are in this on our journey, is to recognize that we are all evolving. And so don't lock yourself in mentally, intellectually. I have been surprised to see how much I've moved in terms of what my experience is, what my perceptions are, what my beliefs are, how I engage. So Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching talks about the value of being like a like a soft green vine, as opposed to old dead wood. An old dead wood is brittle, and when the wind comes, it can blow it over. But something that is green and full of life is flexible. And so as we grow, as we develop, like I have a good friend who he and I have very, very open conversations about atheism. And I just say, look, that's what you think now, right? Uh, you might be surprised. Stay open. Stay open to what you experience, to what you see. You might be surprised that the things that don't seem to make sense now start to make sense, and things that you think are making sense to you right now will start to not make sense as you evolve as a person. The second thing that I'd say for people who have jettisoned whatever religion they've grown up in, is, and again, this is going to sound like a critique, but just hear me out. I relate to this, and I've heard other atheists talk about this, is that what they miss, one of the things that they really miss about whatever religion they had, was community. And in fact, I'll tell you, I was working with this guy. We were actually considering starting a church for atheists, and starting some kind of connection, some kind of group. And it fell apart. And that's one of the reasons that it never seems to work, is that we need a tribe. We need a tribe of people that are like-minded, that we have this goal, this aspiration, this sort of view of the world, this sense of mission. We have this in common. And again, I'm speaking from the experience of talking with people, and even listening to podcasts of atheists talking about this struggle that they have of a lack of community. And so that would be my hope. Whatever your religious background is, whatever your perspectives are, and whatever disillusionment you have, is there some way you can find some tribe to help you progress, to help you get strengthened. And in fact, I'm going to add one other dimension to this that relates to that question. What is it, what is it that we need to watch out for? I'm going to share the screen again. Let's see here. Okay. Eric Butterworth is by no means or was by no means a traditional evangelical pastor. He was a spiritual leader in the unity movement. Passed away some years ago, but he talks about, has a section in one of his books about how people want and they value broad-mindedness. And one of the knocks that they will have about a religion is it's so narrow-minded. And so he has this section where he talks about, we think that everything is good if it's broad-minded and everything's bad if it's narrow-minded. But then he says this: I've heard people rejoice in the fact that they have found a religion that is broad-minded, by which they mean a religion that will take them as they are and make no effort to change them, a religion that gives them freedom, the freedom to do as they please. But religion that does not promote transformation is no religion at all. You might as well say, I found an engineering school that is broad-minded, that will make no effort to change me. If there were such a school, it would be a waste of time and money to enroll in it. Now, you could take this very quote and just substitute the word spirituality for it, because I think it works the same way, just viewing it as spirituality. Spirituality that does not promote transformation is not spirituality at all. That is simply our ego the small self in search of whatever can reinforce itself. Um, so so that's another thing I think to that I've found helpful as I think about spirituality, is that it's not simply something that makes me feel good, but it's also something that helps me be more of be a better person, be a more whole person. I'll stop there. So
That makes a lot of sense to me, because I think that is the growth path that I also had. The religion being born into Confetti and putting it back together, and really it was a growth path. It really made me assess who and what and how I was going to believe and what I believe instead of blindly following. And I think that's a beautiful part of spirituality, and how it does balance with religion in a lot of ways. Because without some religious framework that you grew up with, perhaps you're not able to have that clearer notice of spirituality, because you don't have a framework to start out with. Like, you don't even know how to ask questions because you haven't been given something to think those questions. So I do see that as I see that's the benefit of having, the disillusionment, and then having to rebuild and learn, because it does help you have that growth path. Maybe several times in life. Maybe not just one. And maybe
yeah,
your shift is like, maybe it's a shift from being Christian to being Buddhist, or maybe it's a shift, I mean, like it could be a totally shift to a totally different religion that actually has more of your beliefs in its container than the one you grew up in. But without exploring, you don't know. And without growing, you don't know. So I think
yeah.
that's a beautiful, beautiful path. So we do have a question in the chat, and I do want to make sure we've got 9 minutes left. And I want to make sure that we get to the question in the chat. So if anybody else has questions, please put them in the chat so that we can get to them.
And
Natalie
I can
wrote,
stay longer too
okay,
if there's other stuff. So yeah.
okay, perfect. Um, I
Mm.
just don't want to hold anybody over our time frame
Yeah.
if they're short on time. So Natalie asked, do we have to give ourselves answers, or can we just live with mystery and poetry of life as it's given to us? Surrender to the mystery, welcome the experiences, and look for
That's a great question, and in fact, I think it's almost a point. It's making a point, and it's a point that I would agree with. That you're right. We are not always going to have answers, and I mean part of the reason we have these various world religions and various traditions that are contradictory is that these are very deep and complex things, and we don't have answers to them. So um, yeah, so there. I guess I would just say that we each develop some path that we can live with. Some way of reconciling those. I gave that list of six, kind of questions. Some way of dealing with those that makes sense for us at the level of knowledge that we have. Good. That's a really important point. Glad that came up.
I agree. And Lily, I think that actually also brought a really important point up, that because without actually having had this conversation today, I did not actually, because after my religion was born in Betty Jerez, and I was floating and trying to figure out how to put it all back together, I went through a period of depression, and it was not pretty. So and it took a while for me to get out of that mental health state. And when I was going through it, I didn't know who or how to ask for help. So just the fact that that is true, and Mark bringing it up as part of his knowledge of the addiction process, and that those 5 questions are really part of the how do you get yourself back into some place that you have stability and you have foundation again, because without that foundation, you don't have the ability to have hope. All you have is despair. So I think, Lily, that was a really beautiful mention again in the chat. That yes, and we're in Mental Health Awareness Month, so this is perfect timing for that as well. So thank you, Mark, for for adding that into the presentation. And then Susan asked if she could see the 5 questions again.
Yes, and I'll clarify that we have there's the 5 questions, the 5 sort of spiritual questions that we all need to answer. Then the other one is the 3 questions to ask to make sure that you're about your beliefs, making them authentic. I'll share the screen again and go back to that those spiritual questions. Yeah, here we go. So is there a force or higher power out there in here? Then second, what happens when we die or after we die? And again, no religion can answer that question empirically, right? But anyway, but it helps with some understandings about that. Then number 3, what's my purpose in life? What do I believe about morality? Number 4. And then how do I bridge these things into my everyday life? And so, really that number 5 gets us to the what I'm going to call the technologies that have been developed by the various world religions, whether that be a meditation process, prayer, scripture study, service in a community. And I would also say that one of the realities that I live with as a leader of a spiritual community, this church that I'm the pastor of, number 4, about how we relate or how we live moral living, that transformation often happens in the challenges we have in our community, difficulties getting along and how we rub each other the wrong way. So it's like the smoothing over process happens in that community, I think.
I agree. I think, and it's just like every community. I certainly find it easier to talk to other Lifebook members in a lot of ways than I do talking to my neighbors, because the Lifebook community speaks my growth path language, whereas maybe my neighbor doesn't. And I see that, in this particular aspect too.
Yeah.
It's definitely finding the right tribe and the right community to help support those beliefs and those faith beliefs. So, does anybody else have any other questions at the moment? If so, you can raise your hand and we'll get you off mute, or if not, we'll definitely make sure Mark's screens that he shared are part of the article when I post it. So we'll figure that one out.
Yeah.
how best to do that.
I also have a couple of articles that I wrote about this issue of arrested spiritual development, and then how we can overcome that by giving ourselves permission to wrestle with authenticity, spiritual authenticity. And so I'll share links to those articles as well. They're short.
Perfect. Well, I think that if nobody else has any further questions at this point, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. And Mark, thank you for the beautiful workshop and presentation. I certainly have learned and had new thoughts put into my life just by, and even though we've talked about it before one-to-one, I now have extra things to think about. I really and share with my children as they are also working on their spiritual path as they go forward. So thank you very much.
Good. Well, thank you for inviting me to this, and thanks everyone for being here.
Stop recording.